In the last talk, we were discussing the designation and organization of use and how fundamental that seemed to be to human behavior and even animal behavior. We just have this need to organize certain uses in certain ways to facilitate a kind of lifestyle for ourselves. Now, today we're going to be looking kind of even more at how that shapes buildings, how fundamentally that can be a driver for architectural design. In a way, you might say that this talk is about form follows function. That's a little dictum that great architect Louis Sullivan coined about the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, where he believed, and many people of that generation believed, that the architectural form needs to come out of the function. And he was actually living in an era where he was very much influenced by this guy named H.H. Richardson. And we've looked at some of Richardson's work before. He was by far the most prominent American architect of the 19th century. But he was kind of the guy who began this idea of form follows function. Now, prior to the time of H.H. Richardson, this would have been a very common New England house and really American colonial house. And I would say these houses were generated mostly by form. They're extremely symmetrical. There usually were 4 rooms in the 4 corners. There was a hallway down the center. Sometimes this is called a front hall colonial. This is actually a house in Marblehead, Massachusetts. This is the Longfellow House in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But in this kind of house, it's symmetrical. The rooms on the corners, they could be renamed pretty much anything. That might be the music room, or that might be the library, or that might be the kitchen, or because the rooms are pretty generic. They're not real specifically aligned to function. And even upstairs, where they'd have pretty much the same thing, a hall and then 4 rooms on either side. Those 4 rooms would be about the same kind of room. You can even see the windows are the same size in those rooms. You've, in a way, got 4 very generic rooms with 4 generally the same plan and generally the same window location. Not very attuned to function, really more about making a beautiful, well-composed, symmetrical facade. Along comes H.H. Richardson in the latter part of the 19th century, and he had a different idea about how you might make a house. This is the Stoughton House in Cambridge. It's actually almost across the street from that Longfellow House right there. Just across the street is the Stoughton House. Completely different ideas about how you make architecture. In this case, it's all driven by function. It's all about what rooms relate to what other rooms, what shape should they be, what kind of windows should they have. And the agglomeration of all of that makes this looser, much less staid and orderly kind of facade, but much more about the lifestyle and a little more about the vitality of the people who live in that house. So this is the plan of the Stoughton House. We would have been looking at it from the front here. There's a porch across there, right here. You would enter the porch. Then there's a little receiving room right there, and then a whole reception hall right there. Now, why such a big reception hall? Well, that really had to do with a lifestyle thing that was going on in New England at the time. If I were living then and I were a part of a fairly prominent social class like the Stoughtons were, then I would have my at-home day. And I would maybe designate Tuesday is the Speck family's at-home day. And that would mean that people could visit us and they could reliably know that we were going to be at home and we would welcome visitors on Tuesday. So if a visitor came, they would present their card at the door to the butler. the butler would then let them into the reception hall. And that room need to be big and gracious because that's where your guest would come and be received. And then the butler would go up the stairs to the family quarters on the upper floor, present the card to the man or the woman of the house, or both of them. Whoever was seeing the guest comes down the stair there, and then they might go in the study over here and have a conversation, or they might go in the living room over here. So that would be the kind of at-home day activity. And then if they were having a party, a dinner party, again, there would be a big receiving hall for people to gather as the guests are arriving. And then they would go into the dining room and have their meal right there. And then after the meal, they would adjourn to the study here or the library there. Often the men would go to the study, the women would go to the library. Off of that dining room, again, extremely well organized by function. There would have been a butler's pantry right here and the kitchen right there. The food would be prepared in the kitchen, then it would be plated in the butler's pantry, and then it would be taken out to the guests right here. But all of that servant activity would be completely separate from the social and more public-oriented activity over there. And you can just see in the facade of the building, you can see that front door area, big welcoming porch, come in the front door. You can see that stairs sweeping up to the upper floor. All of the functions are then articulated in the massing and the facade of the building. Inside, that would be that stair in the reception hall. You can see, you can make a real entry off of this stair, very gracious, very beautiful. A nice place for a guest to sit in that area around the fireplace in that reception hall. This would have been the living room, where if you have a larger number of guests, really quite a large room to entertain. Or if it's a smaller number of guests, you can be in the study right here. But both of those very warm, gracious rooms. And then this would have been the dining room, where you can see this kind of invisible door there that goes to the butler's pantry. It's as if a denial that there is service back there. It just magically, somebody appears out of the wall here and serves the food and takes it back into the butler's pantry, completely concealing the back of house on the other side of that wall. And then every move in the architecture of the Stoughton house is all about the sweeping up in that stair and the conical form above it, about the living room having bigger windows and then the master bedroom above having smaller windows. And that more informal, reactionary, accommodating architectural form that comes of a real reflection of use. H.H. Richardson would have done about the same time this house in Chicago, and just to see another way of doing the same thing, this house would have been for a very wealthy businessman, but a businessman who had some disagreements with labor sometimes in his company. So on the street side, it's pretty fortified looking. And then it opens onto a courtyard on the other side on the back here, and that's much more informal and friendly and family oriented. You can see the front door right here, which is here in plan. You come into, again, a reception hall right there. From the reception hall, you go into a study over here or into a living room over here that would have had the same kind of ritual of receiving guests in Chicago as they had in Cambridge. If you have a larger gathering, this is a very wealthy family. They do a lot of entertaining. There would be a music room right here. There's a large dining room right there. And all of that, again, these four rooms, the study, the living room, the reception room, and the music room and the dining room, those 5 rooms become the kind of suite of entertaining spaces. And then on the other side of the dining room is the butler's pantry and the kitchen, a separate door on the side over here for the service deliveries so that they don't disturb the front of the house. They come in back over here directly to the kitchen, and the kitchen and service area over here are related then to the stables and where the horses and carriages are in the back of the house. again, everything is driven by function. And then all of those functions are expressed. Here in the courtyard, we see that spiral stair going from the study up to the bedrooms. We see the dining room being this kind of nodal function. We want people gathered around a table, and that shape just reflects that gathering around a table in the dining room right there. And then on the front of the building, very kind of fortified and standoffish a little bit, very different from that much more welcoming and warm courtyard on the inside. And then that place for service deliveries, perfectly nice, but very subtle, just kind of a flush, hole in the wall that allows you to go in and get to the kitchen and make deliveries in the back of house. Inside, incredibly gracious and beautiful home. The study is here, super warm, books, very masculine kind of feel. This is the reception area as you would come in and then go up the stair. On the left is that music room, and then from the music room you went into the dining room. And again, that dining room where it's all about gathering around a table, and then the bedrooms upstairs. Again, this is just to see how H.H. Richardson's mind is working. We don't make a house by making a box and subdividing it into generic rooms. That's not functional. We make a house by understanding the lifestyle, each room, how it relates to the other room, what shape and form each room becomes, and then we make an assembly of that becomes the architecture of the building. So I want us for a few minutes to see how that scales up from a house. Those houses were kind of revolutionary houses, very important houses in the development of American architecture. H.H. Richardson had a big influence on Louis Sullivan, who said form follows function. Louis Sullivan had a big influence on Frank Lloyd Wright, probably the most famous American architect ever. All of that began a kind of interest in functionalism that was all over the world at that time, and really created modern architecture, which is more about function. So this is a really great example of that. This is the history faculty in Cambridge, England, by James Sterling, done in the 1960s. Now, that notion of functionalism is a very modern idea, and it's really about this convenience and efficiency that we talked about in the last session, where we're thinking that things need to be in the right order so that they operate kind of like a machine, really efficiently. And there's even a kind of feeling of this building that almost feels like it's a machine that really is logical and analytical and put together in a very reasonable and efficient way. Now, this is it's called the history faculty. It's really about the library and the classrooms and the seminar rooms and the faculty offices for the whole Department of History. So it's a very multi-use kind of facility. And the history faculty there would have thought at the time, our work centers on the library. If you want to study history, it's all about research, it's all about being in the library. And so the library was the heart of that building. This cascading form there is the library in the very heart of the history faculty. And then in these two arms on either side are the classrooms and the seminar rooms and the faculty offices and other functions of the building. And that library has this grand kind of embracing feeling. It very much is celebrated as the heart of the building. And then the other functions, there's a corridor along here that gives access to those other functions. And that corridor looks down into that library space. So you're always conscious of the library being very much the heart of what we do here. And this is, again, extremely function-driven. The design of that library is just beautiful. You come in two different directions from the campus. If you want to go up to the classrooms or faculty offices, you would take the elevators or the stairs here. But if you're going to the library, that's the first thing in front of you. So yeah, what is the history faculty about? It's about the library. And that's right in front of you. And the circulation desk is right as you walk in the door. And then the card catalog, back in the card catalog days, would have been over here. And from that circulation desk, you're able to see everywhere in the library. So you have complete surveillance, sort of radially around in the library. Over here are 2 levels of stacks. So that's where all the books are. And it's very easy for the librarian to look and see into the stack space. If anybody's doing anything naughty, they're nailed immediately. But also if you're in the stack space and you're looking for librarian help, clearly you see right back to where I can go to get that kind of help. None of this rabbit warren, crazy maze of circulation in a stack of a library, but a very clear and direct connection back to the librarian. And then in between is a reading room where you take your book, bring it out here to read, take it back, go to see the librarian, get help. Little group study areas around through here. Beautifully, functionally driven design for the library space itself. And then in 3 dimensions, it makes the same amount of sense. See, you come in, there's the librarian's desk right there. They're able to see to the upper level of the stacks, see to the lower level of the stacks. There's the big double height reading room in between. As you go up in the building, you have a corridor that looks down into this space, and you have the classrooms here, seminar rooms here, faculty offices here, most public functions down here, getting fewer numbers and less public, fewer numbers, until it gets private offices up at the top. And along those corridors, you're always able to look down into that big library space down below. And really, the whole thing is about the function of the library being so central. And you're constantly going back and forth between your faculty office and the library, between the classroom and the library, tempting you, attracting you to the idea of spending time researching in this library. And on the outside of the building, it says all the same things. We can see the elevators in very clear elevator core there. We're seeing the difference between the bigger classrooms, the smaller seminar rooms, the faculty offices, the circulation that takes you to all of those rooms on the side. Very clearly defined, just like a machine that all of its parts look like functionally what that machine is meant to do. And then the experience of the building is very much about that clear route, that L-shaped route that takes you to all of the more private functions over here, looks down into the library on that side over there, and it's really quite a remarkable experience. Now, again, this is just seeing how a building is driven by function, how function is the heart and soul and seminal move, understanding all the activities, how they relate to each other, and then putting them together in a super efficient and convenient way, and then expressing that in the architecture of the building. That is functionalism at its best. Another library, it's for a different purpose, a different kind of library, but also one very much driven by function. This is the Exeter Library at a very kind of snooty private boys' school in New England. Exeter is one of those Tony places where rich people send their kids to board and to be students in this very, very high performance environment of this prep school. So they were building a new library for the prep school. It was kind of difficult to find a site because on the one hand, they wanted it to be very central in the middle of the campus. On the other hand, this is an old campus and it seemed kind of filled up, like it was all complete in the center of the campus. And all the available sites were on the periphery. But they finally bit the bullet and they put it absolutely in the heart of the campus. This is a a very historic campus. There are like 18th century buildings on this campus. And right in the midst of those older buildings, they placed the new library. And the library very much reflected the red brick kind of colonial character of some of those buildings. Very regular, very solid, very well composed building from the outside. But also very much driven by function and driven by an analysis of the way this library was supposed to work. So because it's in the center of the campus and because it's accessed from all around, there is this continuous arcade all the way around the ground level. So it's a basically square building with this movement path all the way around. So no matter whether you're coming from the residential part of the campus or the other academic part of the campus or the sports fields, you come from any direction, you get to this arcade, and it takes you around to the front door. And at that front door is this big gracious stair that takes you up to a kind of piano nobile, a noble floor on the upper floor there. And at that point, you're in this grand hall that goes the whole height of the building. And it's got skylights that let beautiful light down into the building. It's got these massive circles on all four sides. It's got a magnificent, sort of grand, powerful scale that says, this is an important enterprise. This library is the heart of our prep school. This library, learning, education, is important in the world. And you get that kind of big statement right in the center of the building, right there. So you go around the arcade, you go up the stairs, you come into that great central well, and then actually the whole building is then organized in a very clear diagram of concentric rings of different functions. So in the center is that very public and grand function right there. Around it are kind of semi-public functions through here in that zone around there. So the semi-public functions are the book stacks and the stairwells and the bathrooms. All of those things are around in that ring. And then in the outer ring of the building out here, and that's shown right here, those are the more private parts of the library. Those are the places where you go with your book and it's about you studying as an individual or maybe in a small group. But it's intimate. This is grand and public and powerful. This is soft and gentle and intimate. And that those rings of function are treated very differently architecturally. This one has a grand scale and it's made out of huge reinforced concrete walls. This one has a much smaller scale, but still out of reinforced concrete. This one has a tiny scale and is made out of brick and is much more intimate. So the function is in concentric rings, and then the architectural expression of that is in those same rings. And now the structure and the materials are being very much driven by the kind of functional analysis that Luke Kahn has done. So there's that big grand space in the center with those big circular openings. We're looking through those circular openings to the book stack area. So that's the book stack, the next concentric ring, the big grand space, the semi-public space through here. Always getting glimpses when you're in that semi-public space back into that big monumental space in the center of the building. And I'll have to say, this is a blow-away space, partly because it's kind of unexpected. From the outside, the building is gentle and modest and fits very well with this context of these historic buildings. And you walk in and up that stair and holy moly, it's gorgeous and it's kind of breathtaking. But there certainly is this magnificent scale that talks of the importance of the library and the centrality of this function in the life of the school and the institution it's a part of.
And then you finally migrate to the outside, where the function is much more informal. Now it's about studying your little carol. It's about sitting in a soft chair and reading a book. There's beautiful light from clear story windows, big clear story windows up here. They give a kind of gentle light, and then smaller little windows over here that are more personal to the carols themselves. It's interesting how these window shapes now really reflect a function. If I'm sitting here with my book looking out a window, that's my scale. That's reflecting this function in the character of the building. And that's very different from the bigger clear story windows that are letting general light into the interior. That tiny little window there, just lighting the desk in the study carrel area, is that tiny little window there. So now there's a scale on the outside of the building, that intimate scale of the students working with a book individually in small groups. All of that now is reflected in that smaller scale that relates to the historic buildings around in the university. And again, there are some study rooms and things like that on that outside that again are not the monumental scale, not the monumental function, but now a much more personal scale and a much more personal function. This is a building that is driven by function, and you can read in it just what's happening in those little study carrels here, in the big light that's being let in behind, in the big study terrace up on the top, and in that kind of warmth and gentleness of an individual reading a book or a small group of people studying. All of that seems perfectly reflected here, and very different from the function of the center, which really is that much more monumental statement. Now, Lucan knew how to do this form follows function at the scale of a building, but he also knew how to do it at the scale of a whole university. This is the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad in India that he did through the 1960s and 1970s. And it's a whole campus that he designed pretty much from scratch. And it has an area that is the academic core. It has an area of student housing. It has an area of faculty housing. So it's a whole complete village that's given over to this institution. And basically, again, it is very much about each individual function finding just the right place and just the right expression. So the library is the heart of the whole campus. It's right there. There's a wing here that's classrooms. There's a wing here that's faculty offices, classrooms and faculty offices. And all of those are then focusing on the library as the central element of the campus, and the library itself having kind of scale and statement that is bigger and bolder because the library is the central element. And that again gives into the big kind of reading room in the library and the interior character of rooms that are also reflecting that function. So the whole complex with the classrooms over here, the classrooms and the library, both very close to the student housing, even these diagonal paths taking you very conveniently and efficiently from the student housing directly into that part of the campus they interface with. And then over here, the faculty offices, they need access to the library, they need more access out to the larger environment, and they're kind of on the other side away from the student housing over here. So he's making a whole village that now is being driven by function the same way. And then the individual pieces and parts are driven by function. This is the student housing with their living rooms and recreation spaces down below, and then all the student rooms up above, and then in the core is where the bathrooms and utility kind of functions are. The scale of the residential part of the campus, very different from the scale of the more institutional part of the campus. And the same thing happening in the faculty housing, where it gets another kind of scale, the scale of an individual house, an individual family, and their life within the larger university. So the bottom line of all of this is that at many different scales, at the scale of a house, at the scale of a library, at the scale of a whole campus, function can be a very important and driving factor in creating the form, the character, the feeling, the architecture of a place. Okay, see you next time.